Jim Talent was the United States Senator from Missouri, was a member of the House from Missouri, now is at the Bipartisan Policy Center. He's got a brand new article out in National Review about looking back at COVID. I spent 80 minutes with Jay Bhattacharya this week, Jim Talent, so great minds think alike. What's your article saying? How does it line up with my conversation with Jay Bhattacharya?
Well, I really enjoyed your conversation with Dr. J, as people call him. And I wrote this article, actually, about a year ago for National Review. It was about the first order failures of the pandemic response, because this is a subject I happen to know something about. I chaired several commissions about 10, 12 years ago with former Senator Bob Graham on the subject of pandemic response and pandemic resilience. Basically, beginning in the late spring of 2020, public health violated virtually every axiomatic precept of pandemic response that they had developed over the decades preceding, which is exactly what Dr. J told you. So one of them is, I participated in war games on pandemics. I've lectured on it. I've interacted with these people. So here's one of the things they say. Okay, look, we quarantine the sick, not the healthy. Because highly contagious viruses, once they have seeded in the population, are very difficult to stop from spreading, okay? Another, if you get an influenza virus and recover from it, you have immunity, at least for a season. Well, our public health authorities wouldn't even admit that for like 2 years, much less study how long the duration was. They've studied.
Do you agree? Do you agree with Dr. Bhattacharya that we need a national commission to look back in calm, measured fashion and comprehensive fashion at what we did during COVID so we don't do it again?
Oh, absolutely. Public health communication. You're honest in what you tell people. You don't unnecessarily frighten them, and you don't manipulate them. Okay? You give them the information. You want people adjusting based on their own individual circumstances. So you want them making decisions about whether their elderly relatives, what activities they ought to engage in, for example. So maybe yes, and I use this example in the article. We have a 90-year-old mother-in-law who lives with us, okay? She used to love going to the casinos. We said, Mom, you're not going to the casinos during the pandemic. She also liked getting exercise at the community pool. We said, Mom, you should keep doing that because that exercise is important to your mental and physical health. But they closed the pool, okay? So she couldn't do that. See, you people will adjust. Masking for little kids?
That was inane at the time and insane in retrospect. And I'm going to get you deep into this with Jay. Now, tell me your reaction to the Mark Montgomery interview, because that's you may do pandemics, but you really do China, Jim Talent.
Yes, brilliant. And look, you've been asking all week, what do we do in response to what the Chinese are doing in Cuba? Well, they have, by the way, a space station in Argentina already. They've had it for 5 years. And
I did not know that.
It's a 100-foot long satellite, which they use for recon, okay? And the Argentinians never inspect it. It's supposed to be used for civilian use, but the Argentinians have never inspected it, and there's no enforcement tools under their agreement with China. Okay, so here's what we do. We figure out what the Chinese really don't want us to do, and we do that.
And we do that.
The number one thing is strengthening short-term deterrence in Indo-PACOM, and the number one item on that list is the LRASMs, the long-range anti-ship cruise missiles, but also stop.
Obviously, I've never heard the acronym LRASM before, and I kind of live around the fringes of this debate. How does anyone not know about LRASMs like me?
Well, really, you know what? Unless you're Mark Montgomery or Jerry Hendricks or one of the, or you're a former Marine like Mike Geller, you don't need to know the details. What you need to know is anything that gets more medium and long range strike based in Indo-PACOM, we need to do. And we need to harden the targets, the bases we now have with, for example, 360-degree missile defense in Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, and also our Japanese bases. Because it's Gallagher's concept of the anti-Navy. In other words, you threaten their assets. The less certain they are that their assets are survivable, the less likely they're going to try at least a landing on Taiwan.
I've never heard until this morning the Montgomery Doctrine, which has put LRASM, is my new favorite acronym, on B1s and maybe B21s and maybe B52s, and all of a sudden they're vulnerable everywhere. All of a sudden it's asymmetrical warfare from our side towards them.
Exactly. It's Mike Gallagher's anti-Navy. I mean, you can phrase this different ways, but harden the assets we now have. Now, another thing I would do, and the Chinese would go nuts if you did this, okay, is immediately start implementing the Shipyard Act to build up our shipyard capabilities, particularly ship maintenance, which Jerry talks about a lot. I think about 30% of our submarines are not deployable because they're stuck in maintenance, because we don't have the maintenance facility. And
Correct.
and Mark is of course right. The undersea domain is the one area where we still have a significant advantage. And the Virginia class attack submarine is probably the deadliest conventional platform in the world in any service.
Since we have an advantage, you press it. If the play works, you run it again and again and again until they can't defend it. Jim Talent, follow him on Twitter. Follow everything that he writes for National Review and listen to him every week right here on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, Senator.